Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
On January 1st, we kicked off a 60-day global challenge to raise $1 million for mental health called 100 Great. Now, 100 Great is a challenge to train yourself to do 100 push-ups in a row, hence the name 100 Great. And we're doing this with a global community of men who are training the mind and the body to transcend whatever they believe their physical and mental limits to be. Doing 100 consecutive push-ups sounds like a Mount Everest for most guys, but doing this training program for 60 days, no more than 20 minutes of training per day, helps us to confront those inner critic limits that oftentimes are nowhere near our actual capacity. But because that inner critic allows us to drift and we listen to it far more often than we really should, we end up playing a much smaller game in our lives than we're capable of. So this 60-day 100 Great challenge is really training for us to raise our game physically, mentally, emotionally in every area of our life. It's not too late to register for the challenge. Still got about 50 days left. So check out all the details and you can register right now in the show notes. Now, to support this theme of mental health, which remains more relevant than ever after being in a global pandemic for 2 years and listening to a polarized society yell back and forth at each other for whatever reason all of the time, we wanted to bring you a more productive conversation about how to accumulate tools and skills to navigate the adversity in your life and also how to get back up when you've hit rock bottom. Now, back again for another conversation is Giovanni Beckford, who's been on the show 3 times previously, typically to talk about books, most recently in episode 276, which was just a few weeks ago, 12 book ideas for building your best self. He's our resident expert on book recommendations, but this time he's coming on the show to share his story of how he hit rock bottom during the pandemic, how information consumption was one of the main reasons that led him into a place of paranoia, anxiety, and then eventually depression, how surrender allowed him to accept what he was feeling when he was trying to control and fight it, and the tools that he used to slowly but surely build himself back up to a stronger, more resilient, and more confident man than ever before. So in this episode, you're going to hear about how burnout is often a precursor to anxiety and depression. Not only a precursor, but an accelerant. How the dangers of consuming too much information could have an impact on your mental health. And Giovanni talks about this in a really, I think, very approachable and practical way. Why a big part of mental and emotional well-being is simply about unplugging from the information superhighway. Whether it is the news or the social media or your cryptocurrency balance, unplugging from that can often be the first step in upgrading your mental and emotional well-being. We have a conversation about why you should stop putting off therapy and just try it already. Why supplementation, right? Like food supplements can have a profound impact on your inner chemistry and emotional well-being. And then Giovanni closes off the conversation with 5 of the biggest needle movers for upgrading his mental health and your mental health when climbing out from your bottom. Enjoy today's conversation with Giovanni Beckford on tools for overcoming adversity and your rock bottom moments. So we're about to welcome back a guest who's making his 4th appearance on the Great Man Within podcast. I believe this puts him in rarefied air. I don't know, Bri, if we've had anybody who's been a guest on the show even 3 times, but 4 times is you're on the Mount Rushmore by yourself, right? And so welcome back, Giovanni Beckford, for your 4th appearance on the Great Man Within podcast. And also, happy 30th birthday, brother.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for being such great Sherpas on this podcast journey.
That's the first time I've been called a Sherpa. That's cool.
How do you feel about that?
I'm into that.
You down with it?
It worked with Mount Rushmore. I mean, I think these 2 analogies are really playing with each other.
Yeah. So Giovanni was just on the show for his 3rd annual Books That You Need to Read for the Year Ahead conversation, and that has become kind of a staple of our show. Every year at year's end, we do a design the next year of your life conversation, and then Giovanni comes on because he's the guy I go to for book recommendations every year, giving us the best of books that men need to read for the year ahead. But this conversation that we're going to have today goes a little deeper into Giovanni's personal story, something that I know is going to touch the heartstrings of a lot of men who are listening to this podcast and be quite resonant with those of us who have been on a mental health journey of our own. And, Giovanni, I've had the benefit of being close to you as you've gone through some of the ups and downs of your emotional journey and mental health journey. So maybe if you can illuminate some of our listeners around what you went through this past year, and maybe just give us an entry point and then we'll dig in from there.
Yeah, sure. So this definitely has been quite a roller coaster of a year, but even the last year and a half to 2 years for a lot of people has been quite the ride. And so I hope with my story, at least, it just helps to share that anyone else who's still today, as the world's opening back up somewhat, even if you're still going through things, it's perfectly normal. It's okay. It's part of the human experience. For me, so last year, prior to the early 2020, I'm very sort of inquisitive about finding risks before they happen. So early January 2020, I was deep in the Twitter universe, following all my sort of network theory friends who were talking about this thing called COVID that's happening in China and may eventually make its way to the US. And this is like January 2020, like 3 months before lockdown. And so back then I was like, oh yeah, there's this thing that no one's talking about that's going to happen. And when it actually happened, when lockdown happened in March, I felt very vindicated and very sort of almost excited to see things go down. And of course, things hit the fan quicker than anybody could anticipated. There's a big difference when you have mass hysteria on a local level compared to a country level, compared to a global level. And when both you and your best friends are flipping out, that's one thing. But when the government's also flipping out, that's another thing. The big thing that I got from that was almost the dangers of having too much information. For me, that was when the spiral initially started. I kind of plugged into as much information sources as I could, not necessarily traditional news media outlets, but independent journalists, etc. And it even got to a point where I was listening into police scanner radios.
Is that legal?
I think so, because it's all public information. You can just tap the scanner. But that showed me, one, how irrational I can get listening to police scanners in my area. I wanted to feel safe in my area. I wanted to make sure that my mom and brothers were safe. And so I was on not only the Citizen app, but all directly tapped into the police scanner. And it was such an information overload that I became very paranoid about everything. And that paranoia trickled into my personal relationships, friendships, even how I viewed myself. And it was quite an unhealthy period. And a big part of my recovery has been unplugging intentionally. And what I had to do or work for to separate myself from is the feeling ashamed of not keeping in the loop or not knowing enough. And this is not quite the same as like, oh, I'm going to escape to Tulum and just ignore the world. It's more so on just like, even on a domestic level, you don't have to know everything, and understanding the incentives of how media and information are disseminated, and that it's very fear-driven for a reason, and that there's a lot of capitalistic incentives that propagate that atmosphere.
Giovanni, thanks for sharing this, man, because in my mind, you have an infinite capacity to consume information. And knowing that even you have a limit when it comes to this kind of stuff and what it can do to you. It's like food, like depending on what we're eating, right? It's going to affect like what our body looks like and feels like and everything else. And I'm curious, as it sounds like you were doing this for a little while. I mean, you were really early on in January talking or listening and learning about COVID. How long did it take you to realize that some of this information was poison?
So it happened in phases. There were phases where the information just hit a circuit breaker internally and I just had to stop. And so that was like from March, I was the type to check into all of our prior governors' press briefings and I was on that daily cadence right up until June. And then I stopped everything. Then I kind of plugged back in right around election time. So right around like November-ish. And then I unplugged again this year in February due to personal reasons, which we'll kind of talk a little bit about some of the other things that happened throughout the year. But it does take some time to pull yourself from the maze. It helps to have friends that can see when something's astray or when you've been too far deep into the rabbit hole to help you get back out.
Can you talk about that instance really quick? Because I know we've had, Dominic, what was the comedian's name that we had on the podcast?
Frank King.
Frank King, amazing guy. He talks a lot about how friends can be allies in these situations, but it has to be done in a certain way because you risk alienating your friend or sending them down a different path. And I'm curious, like, what was effective for your friends to say, yo, you're in the maze, Giovanni, like, come on out?
There are a couple of things. I do have some really great roommates who've helped to not even directly acknowledge that there was a problem, but just give me another activity to do as opposed to continually consume the maze. It's like, hey, you want to go for a walk? Or, hey, did you see this funny episode or such and such? So this kind of gentle pulling away so that it pulls you away from a compulsion to break the loop. That also helped. And it also helped me to see other friends down the rabbit hole, and it acted as this interesting out-of-body mirroring experience to bring some residual self-awareness through seeing my friends down the rabbit hole.
So you saw them, you're like, they're crazy. And then you looked at your mirror and you said, oh shit, like, I'm also crazy. I mean, you're like really like looking at you right now, like clean cut, like good. Looks like you just got a haircut, maybe. I don't know. Just shaved right before the podcast. But I imagine like when you're in the hole, like was your hair like super long and like your beard all over the place? Yeah.
That was another good thing. Glad you brought that up because I definitely hit woolly mammoth territory. And during lockdown, all the barbershops were closed. So I bought my own like clippers and everything. This year, of course, I haven't utilized it as much. I'm back in the barber. So you realize like there's a reason why these are service goods that people pay for. A little bit of a trial and error, but yeah, I'll trust the pros when it comes to that. But you do see the effects of you let yourself go. So either like you're not grooming yourself as well, or the weight gain or the weight loss, in my case, that is also an early warning signal too when things are getting out of whack. You're out of your routines.
Yeah, there's a few things you said I think a lot of us can relate to, Giovanni. That's first one about the dangers of consuming too much information. We all rationalize when we're doing it. We all have a reason of why we're doing it. I think about like my friends who are in cryptocurrency and how many of them have suffered like mild panic attacks over the last year and a half because they're following the ebbs and flows of crypto like minute by minute. And I actually had this conversation with some of your friends at your birthday parties last week. And when I said panic attacks, one of the dudes jumped out. He was like, oh my God. He's like, I have panic attacks all the time around like, the fluctuations of crypto. I'm in crypto. I have no clue right now, like where it is and like how much, even of my percentage of my net worth it is, because there's a part of it that, yes, I feel ignorant. And at the same part, it's like, it is a mental health choice I've made because I know my own tendencies. So I guess my question is, around this too much information, whether it's news, social media, or cryptocurrency, what have you learned from going through this journey about like how much information is enough?
Yeah, I think that scoping it to what is within the realm of my control. So more like a stoic influence in terms of what is your triad control, things that you have no control over, partial control over, full control over, and understanding the difference between those boundaries and using information, putting a requirement of, does this information help me make better decisions or something that I can take in the near term? And that really helps to cut out a lot of information flow when you realize like how much information is not part of your day-to-day life or day-to-day actions and decisions. Also, when you're closer to your purpose, that acts as a natural buffer zone significantly to shield away from things that don't really matter as much. I do think that that's also a bigger problem on a societal scale, this kind of desire or yearning for meaning and purpose. And that gap is also, the market supports that with tabloids and celebrity gossip. People are living vicariously through other people's purpose or missions if you don't have your own. So someone else is going to fill that gap. And me realizing that and realizing throughout the pandemic, I really felt like I lost that vision of what I actually wanted to do and what I actually wanted to build. And a part of that, what I've realized now is what I want to do is I want to help people unlock their inner polymath. That can be achieved through self-awareness, discipline, and learning how to learn. Finding out where are you naturally gifted, what needs does society have, and what hobbies can you do as lifestyles that, given enough time, you will become an expert in like 5 to 10 years.
Giovanni, is the polymath that intersection of like, what does the world need? What are your special gifts? What hobbies do you have? Is that what that polymath is?
That is based on the Ikigai practice,
Yes.
which is this Venn diagram of overlap. The polymath, my personal belief is that you probably can't have a polymath younger than 40 because it does take a decade or so to acquire multiple skill, like that specialized skills across multiple areas. I feel that the world is becoming too specialized to a fault. That creates a mass communication problem because the more specialized something is, you need coordination across those different areas. Especially after the lockdown, I see like our infrastructure is crumbling. So many things that we expect to work are not working because we don't have the right coordinators, or specifically, we don't have the right leaders in place who understand all those different areas. We're kind of missing this renaissance to unlock that energy. So that's kind of my own personal, what I personally am interested in and value and what I see the world needs.
Got it. Thank you. Getting back to your journey about, okay, you found yourself in this information overload and now you enter in this paranoid state and maybe even, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like a depression tunnel. Can you give us a sense for like, what does life feel like for you when you're there and what was going on around you?
Yes. So I experienced a very severe range of depression and anxiety. Anxiety is this kind of like frantic hyper state. And depression, of course, is this very low energy, very low motivation, low energy state, literally a depressed state that caps the range of emotions that you can feel. So it's a very limited set of a range of emotions that you feel. And off that range, they tend to be in the negative emotional spectrum. What it can look like is not eating at all until it's like 8 p.m., realizing you've skipped both breakfast, lunch, and almost skipped dinner before you went to bed. And it could be going to bed and sleeping for like 12 hours and waking up not feeling rested. It could be losing a ton of weight or gaining a ton of weight. For me, it was losing a lot of weight. It could be watching Netflix for like 8 hours straight. It could be not going outside for like 5 days straight or a week. Being locked in your room. It was something that shocked me, and I felt shame and guilt for having gone through, especially as someone who I see myself as a very ambitious, driven person. And even working in a work from home dynamic, it's like I had a lot of extra time to work on side projects. Didn't have the energy and motivation to work on side projects. Didn't have the energy and motivation to see friends or talk to people. And so it was this negative spiral that you felt negative and you viewed the world negatively as well. And even at work, it showed up in that I was always the cynical type and always was like, oh, this is not going to work. This is not going to work. This is not going to work. So you have this like negative world filter in how you take in and how you give out. And all of this, it felt like an illness that even with my self-awareness and even knowing what to do, I just couldn't do.
This is a really important message, Giovanni, because what I'm hearing you say is that nobody's immune, right? There's no amount of knowledge. There's no amount of exercise. There's no amount of anything that can just make someone like not go there. What I'm most curious about is in your story, what else was, because you mentioned work and how you had this negative world context. And I'm curious, like where else in your life that popped up? And then eventually, of course, then what, right? Like we're sitting here on a podcast talking about this today, all in retrospect, but at some point it sounds like there was a shift.
Yeah. So it, of course, showed up in work, in performance. My productivity caved. I was very negative in terms of feedback and suggestions. Showed up in relationships. I was dating someone at the time, and no matter how much she tried to help me make me feel better, cook, clean, other stuff, bedroom, whatever, it was like this black hole that just could not reciprocate, could not feel good for what was happening. It made me very distant from family. When it came to friends who wanted to like hang out as the summer was going on and the world was going up, I still was very reserved and closed. My reading collapsed. I had no motivation or interest in reading. working out, didn't really want to work out. Towards the tail end of the things start to shift. So I started therapy for the very first time last year. And
good for you, bud.
Thank you. A lot of guys, it's a difficult topic for men. I don't know. Guys usually view, or I interpret that guys tend to view therapy as a feminine thing. Like only women should go to therapists to talk. And there's even a whole genre of memes around that.
Really?
Like, yeah, like especially on Twitter, it's like men would rather stampede the Capitol than go to therapy. Like,
that's true. That's really true.
Men would rather like buy the U.S. Constitution than go to therapy.
Giovanni, something you're really good at, I call it productizing, but it's taking this experience that you had and giving us the bullet points of how you got there. And I'm curious, like there was something where you're like, okay, I started therapy for the first time after having all this awfulness. Like, what are the 3 steps? Like, what happened in terms of like making that decision?
Right.
Yeah. So actually, this was part of my pre-pandemic prep steps. So back in January, when I suspected that the world was going to go to shit, in February, I was like, all right, I need to do these amount of things before they sell out. So I like went on Amazon, bought a whole bunch of supplies, and then I went to Talkspace and signed up for a therapist. It's like, all right, therapists are probably going to be in high demand if things go to shit. So let me sign up for a therapist.
Wait, this is awesome. So like everyone else is buying toilet paper, and Giovanni's like therapy is going to be in high demand. Brian, you had like
after never being in therapy,
right?
This is amazing. Right. This is like a foresight here.
Right, you had a crossbow on your list, and Giovanni's going out and signing up for therapy.
Right,
it's great.
Different approach.
Okay,
one was more useful for the record.
So yeah, I did had that foresight to sign up for therapy before it became too high in demand, which eventually did, and really enjoyed the process. I think of a therapist as like a mind mechanic, and there are certain things like you can pride yourself in the engine that you have and how good it can run. And you can like watch a couple YouTube videos to fix your car, fix your engine, but there's professionals for different categories of things. When I made that reframing and shift to think of a therapist as a mind mechanic, that really helped me to open up and let go of my pride and ego in terms of having someone that can like get inside my mind and figure out how it works. It's like, oh yeah, this is actually useful. There are limits to how much I can fix myself. There's only so much you can deadlift and bench press before you need to talk to somebody.
Right.
And sometimes the gym is not the best place to have this kind of conversation. So having a dedicated professional to talk through these things really helped. There is a challenge in terms of finding the right therapist. I would recommend just starting somewhere and realizing that in itself is a process. So imagine you're looking for an apartment. Of course, it's going to be a challenge to find an apartment. So you may Airbnb a place for a couple of months until you find the right place. You can just talk to someone for a couple of months and then continue to look for a therapist in parallel until you find the right fit. For me, I realized that my first therapist that I went with, which worked really well, we shared the same Myers-Briggs type. So that really helped in terms of certain cognitive quirks or preferences and how the world was viewed. She also shared those similar viewpoints. And a lot of validation I got from that is that random points in our conversation, she would recommend various books and things that I haven't read and heard from. So I was like, all right, yeah, this is going to work really well. And the other thing that I liked was that she really challenged me. I asked for that. I would prefer not to have like quote unquote soft therapists, because I realized that I get to be in the tendency of trying to outsmart my therapist and trying to like play mind games with them to see if they're really actually good. And she was able to keep up and push back even as much. And that was really helpful. Eventually she left the platform. So I had to go through the process of finding a new therapist. And my new therapist, he is also African-American and an older man in his late 60s and has just a ton of experience and a ton of cultural shared experience to talk through things that was going on last year, especially with the George Floyd protests and other different dynamics. And that really helped. And the other funny dynamic that I experienced with therapy is similar to if you're watching a series and you don't know if it's going to be another season or not. So you can make progress through therapy, and therapy doesn't have to be this indefinite thing. It can be a start and end process when you feel like you've come to a good and healthy place. And for me, I found a dynamic where I would get to a really good place and be like, all right, I'm done. I think it's over with. And then towards the final minutes, he would whip out some random trauma that I haven't even like dived to look at. And this is like a season climax. It was like, oh, nope, there's going to be a season 2 of this. Yeah. that was another interesting experience too.
That's not only a great analogy, it also brings up another point about we tend to kind of go and get support when things are rough. And then as soon as we start to turn the corner, it's like, all right, I'm good, I'm out. And then, all of the very structures, like the support systems that were in place that allowed for you to get to that place of greatness, you're like, okay, I'm gone. I'm done with that. Say goodbye to the coaching, goodbye to the therapy. And then you're good for like the next couple of weeks or months or whatever. And then the next thing kind of comes back up and you don't have the structure in place. And then, we start the whole thing all over again. I just wanted to make that point for anyone who's listening, who's, considering therapy or, coaching, or maybe you're turning a corner, you're thinking about leaving the structure, just to consider that. This may be a bit of a tangent, Giovanni, but I think it's important also with more of us now becoming aware of mental health and having more of these conversations, especially in the workplace where it's much more open. If you think about your leadership at Google, right, where you have a manager who's responsible for managing a number of different employees and workflows, and, you're going through something. Your productivity is not where it once was. Work needs to get done, but there's also like mental health that comes first. What do you want and need from your manager, during a time like that? Like what kind of support, what kind of conversations could be had for people who are leading those who are going through something like that? What do we do?
Yeah. One worry that people have is like, oh, I hope I don't get fired because I'm going through this situation.
Right.
And I think that definitely from a manager leadership, communicating expectations, or even better, recalibrating expectations and communicating how much buffer you have and how much like slack can be put into the system to give you some leeway to deal with what you're going through, to help provide, if the company has strong mental health support resources or internal counseling or coaching, helping to provide some of that, or even seeing if it's something that's expensible. Can the company maybe expense some therapy sessions or expense some coaching sessions, helping to communicate to other team members to see if they can like take up some of the extra work or retask or redelegate work to you that is less cognitively intensive, more to just make you feel like you're still contributing and part of the team, but is not like a critical chain in the project or what needs to get done. Really talking from a more informal and personal approach instead of operational approach. I think that the whole dynamic of like, oh, this is what I did yesterday, this is what I'm doing today, like the daily operational focused tone may not be as helpful, because when you're in a more vulnerable state, your whole priorities reshift. Work kind of goes down in the priority stack. So You're not as focused on the operational day-to-day, shifting the tone to be more of like speaking to the individual and not just like the coworker. I think those are some important shifts.
Yeah, those are really helpful. And here's one more question that we can get back to your story that isn't a part of the ability to communicate. If I'm a leader and I'm leading someone who's on the team that I could clearly see that there's something going on, is a part of the communication that you just recommended predicated on the rest of the team knowing that you're dealing with something. This is where it gets a little bit messy, right? Is you may be going through something. You may not want your mental health stuff to be known by the rest of the team. If I'm a leader who's like trying to shift around resources to others, how do I do that and provide you air cover without putting you on blast and what your personal situation is?
Mm-hmm. That would depend on the individual. I'm more of an open person, so I tend to prefer people to know what's going on. The experience that I experienced at my company, their policy seems to be like keep personal matters on the down low and not broadcast them or explain what, even when I had a death in the family, their intent was just like, oh, you can keep that on the down low. We don't have to like talk about this. But I felt like that was actually a big, important life thing that happened. And I should tell my direct teammates what's going on. That can be interpreted by the individual a little bit weird. From my interpretation, when the company too overly focuses on keeping things on the down low, I interpret that as not being a distraction to the team, which can be a good thing and also something that can make you feel less connected from the team. Because if everyone is almost like in a more mercenary mode, like we just need to get our job done, we can't handle these like personal distractions, then you can feel less a part of the team. And that can lead to like productivity and collaboration issues down the road. Depending on the nature of the company and the existing culture, it may be different tactics that are necessary, as well as the level of openness of the individual going through the situation.
Thank you.
So Giovanni, you talked about the performance and work stuff. And I think there's a few more things that happened this past year. Are we at this point at rock bottom, or was there still more going on?
So that was just the start of the catalyst. So I had went through relationship issues, kind of COVID relationship breakup, and also had some matters related to eviction with some close family members, and then also had a death in the family. My dad had passed away at the start of the year. So what I realized is that as strong as a mentally tough person that you think you are, it could be that case. It could be that you actually are a mentally tough person, but everyone has their limits and limitation. You could almost think of it as like a force field. Like a force field, and this is kind of in science fiction, but a force field, imagine that you have like, force field is 100% battery, and then it takes a crazy onslaught and that brings its charge down to like 80%. And then there's a second wave attack, 50%, third wave attack, 30%, another final attack. Okay, shield's down. Now you're vulnerable.
And the lights turn red and the captain goes nuts and they make some killer maneuver. I can't wait to hear your killer maneuver, but yes, I'm with you.
At that point, I'm just kind of mentally collapsed, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and mentally.
These are big onslaughts too. I mean, we're talking about like family living situations. We're talking about like a romantic relationship, talking about your father passing away. I mean, these are not small things. And it sounds like when those happened, you weren't in the best of state anyway, right? So
wrapped in a global pandemic.
It's a global pandemic. I mean, there's a lot going on here.
It's all part of the human experience. And that's the biggest learning that I've had. There was a point when all this was going down that something within me wanted to try to stop the shells from falling. And I just had to surrender and hope that the shells wouldn't have a direct hit. And that was a part of my learning journey. When I hit rock bottom was when I accepted and allowed myself to hit rock bottom. And I stopped fighting back and forcing it.
Giovanni, prior to that moment, when you're like accepting rock bottom, I'm freaking here. What were you trying to do before that?
I was trying to control the situation. I was trying to fight the forest fires and seeing if I can contain the blaze.
Yeah.
But as my therapist so wisely pointed out, sometimes you have to let the forest fires burn out. Like there's this natural process where the shrubbery has to clear. You have to let life operate. And when you try to control and navigate, like when you try to control the blaze too much, you just burn your hands. Sometimes you have to get out of the way, surrender, lie down, and the fire should blast. There's only so much that can burn down. And so once the shrub cleared and I'm at this rock bottom state, my natural approach would have been to like put together a plan. But I think the very first couple of things that I did was just like, I'm going to drink some water and I'm going to go for a walk. And I just kind of kept it simple. And that was like the big learning is like, I wasn't too quick to say like, all right, this is the battle plan. This is what I'm going to do to get myself back together. It was just like, I'm just going to chill the fuck out and I'm going to get some water and I'm going to go for a walk. And I just kept on doing that day by day. I was like, all right, I'm going to have to learn how to walk again, but I've walked before. I've walked very, very far and I've come this far. And I know that this is going to be a long journey, but I had a lot of confidence that if I can get through that, I can get through so much more. And so I kind of went within and I kept it simple and I allowed my body to do what it's designed to do. It heals, it gets stronger and it gets better.
This is such an important point, man. Like, because there is so many, I know I've been in these situations where it's like shit's going down. Put a plan together. Yep. Let's go. Let's execute. Let's get other people involved. Like even going to therapy is a do sort of activity. But I could hear in your voice when you said, dude, I just got a glass of water and I went for a walk.
Yeah.
I could see it in you where you're like, that's all like capable of at that moment. And it's all I needed in that moment. So like hearing just the simplicity of like glass of water, go for a walk. And like, that was a major move is just like, oh, I feel that in my heart, man.
Yeah, because we've talked about this a lot before on the podcast, Bri. All of these techniques, meditation, breath work, therapy, they're all necessary. They're all great. And there's times where they don't work, quote work, because like sometimes it's just resistance and trying to control the uncontrollable. And Giovanni, you said this so perfectly. It's like sometimes there are these forest fires that are just burning that if you try to get too close to them, all that's going to happen is you're going to burn your hands. And there is that relief when there's that surrender, right? Like letting go of this is happening. I'm just a passenger on this journey, and something else clicks in, and there may be more pain to experience. There may be more pain to experience as you go to that descent of hitting rock bottom. But there's also that beautiful feeling of once I'm there and I've stopped trying to control, and all I need to do is grab a glass of water and take that walk, you can feel that something has turned. There's like a new sense of freedom from that having let go. Am I describing your experience appropriately? Because I've been there.
Yeah, you are. There is definitely a compulsion to overcomplicate things or think that the solution should be complex. But time and time again, I just realized that keeping it simple and doing the thing that humans and people have done for like hundreds of years, it's just the simplest solutions have lasted the longest for a reason. Time removes the unnecessary. And that was also another interesting dynamic about time too, is that I also learned that time does not heal all wounds. Some wounds can stay for a very long time, and it takes like active work. So once you've kind of allowed yourself to surrender to the moment and you've done the simple thing, after a while, the systems and plans do come in handy. And what I realized is that they unlock consistency. So the plan can help you be very consistent as you reintegrate back to life, that you have this plan of execution and things that you know you need to do, because it can help you prioritize and keep consistent through a more dynamic nature. And so one of the things that I did was I have a very large whiteboard in my room. And this whiteboard, I have almost like a health chart. And on it, I have various sectors. So I have a physical health section, a productivity section, a capital section, and a writing section. And I have a color-coded system similar to like a stop, like a red light, green light, yellow light, where, okay, if my physical health, my gym routine is not good, then it's a red for the week. If my water is good, it's a green for the week. Waking up every morning, I write these simple things down that move the needle the most. And I have this like quick status report of, am I doing the work to get better and get healthier? And what each of these symbol sectors also show me is that it's hard to get better at all these things at the same time. Some sections will remain yellow and red for a very long time. And then a section that you're working on, you start on. So I start with physical health. So I'm working on my supplementation. I'm working on my sleep, my water intake, my stretching. That's getting green. And after I build that strong foundation, then my productivity is starting to come back up. Then my writing is starting to come back up. Then I'm making smarter money decisions. So having this in like physical form, I found to be a lot more helpful than an app or digital form. I can still track that, but it can get easily lost in the noise. And having this physical presence and actual spatial awareness of what you're working towards and the health of it has also really helped my journey.
Giovanni, that's an awesome system of leading indicators, lagging indicators for your mental and emotional well-being. You know, as we wrap up this conversation today, what are some of the other tools that you've employed that move the needle the most as you're coming out of depression on the other side, that some of our listeners could potentially employ if they find themselves either coming out of depression or just coming out of a mentally and emotionally challenging period of time?
So some of the biggest things that I found to help, of course, the ones that have moved the needle the most also tend to be the simplest. So drinking more water. I had a very hard time drinking enough water. So I bought one of those big gallon water container bottles, and turns out I can drink a gallon of water if I just have like one singular container to drink a gallon of water. That's helped a lot.
Why is that so important? Why is water such an important thing?
Water is such an important thing because your body is made up of mostly water, but even more so than that, it helps to flush out the system. You can physically move, but internally you need water to move. So the water is this internal fuel that helps to allow more toxins to be cleared out, allow your body to be well hydrated so it can work well, allows your brain to also have enough fuel to fire off in the right area. So water is incredibly important. Going on daily walks has also been very therapeutic and calming. Going to therapy has been incredibly helpful. Working out and going to the gym. And with all the things that I'm naming, understand that even though I'm doing all of them at the same time now, I started simple with just like focusing on one for a couple of weeks and eventually building up the routine and then building on top of that. So the water, the therapy, the going to the gym has been helpful. But the thing that has surprised me the most has been supplementation. Supplementation, I feel like, has helped tremendously to snap out of depression, get certain things under control, and have more energy. And definitely, you can check in with your doctor, do your own research. But some of the supplementation that has helped me the most has been magnesium. So magnesium has helped tremendously with helping to relax my muscles, helping with sleep, helping with just allowing my brain to function properly. Zinc has helped tremendously. Our body doesn't produce as much zinc naturally, so having additional supplementation can help a lot. Ashwagandha has helped tremendously.
Big time. Same for me.
In terms of overall stress perception.
Yes.
So certain people on a biological level are way more sensitive to stress. And so you can be in situations where you get stressed by the simplest thing. And this helps to regulate hormone production and cortisol levels and how you feel stress. And then vitamin D. Many people have vitamin D deficiencies, and that is one of the biggest things for overall serotonin production, happiness, and immune system health. So that has also been big. And then vitamin B12 has also helped significantly with energy production. You can eat a lot, but your body may not actually extract enough energy and put that energy to use. And vitamin B12 helps significantly with that.
That's great.
I'll double down on all of those. I take all of those every day. And there's a couple other ones too that are more specific to me. But Dominic, I know you've got a really strict regimen too. What's yours like there?
So the supplementation is something that I messed around with for years, just kind of listening to what people said they needed. It's like, oh, magnesium is great, zinc is great. And I would buy these things and it was never personalized to me. Do you know what I'm saying? And until I went to a nutritionist who then, we did some blood tests, urine tests, poop tests, all the stuff, and looked at actually, was I deficient in vitamin D or these other things? And what ultimately we found out was I need to be on ashwagandha, which as soon as I got on ashwagandha, like the very next day, I woke up with a different level of stress. I was so stressed out. I was waking up every morning with like panic of everything that I had going on during the day. And I would mitigate that with breath work and cold showers and all the other things that we do. But I had to do those things in order to mitigate it. After supplementation of ashwagandha, I would wake up and that panic wouldn't be there. It was like liberating. And so I went on a couple of other supplements that helped to moderate my cortisol levels, cell repair, mitochondrial support. And that's a whole other podcast in and of itself. But I will tell you, like Giovanni couldn't have hit the nail more on the head. Supplementation is something that if you can get someone that you trust, typically not like your primary care physician, it's going to be someone who's like a nutritionist that can do these tests and look at your specific chemistry and say, do these 3 to 5 supplements. It can have a profound effect on not just physical resiliency, but mental and emotional resiliency too. Giovanni, that's awesome. Your list of 5 biggest needle movers that we heard here were water, daily walks, therapy, working out, and supplementation. As you said, you didn't hit all 5 of these right away, but maybe it started with water and daily walks for the first couple of weeks. And then you started adding on, therapy and working out or supplementation. And the key point here is don't feel pressure or guilt if you don't have all 5 of these things going on day number 1, right? Like just pick one, stabilize that, add on as you go through the process. And your list of supplements were magnesium, zinc, vitamin D, ashwagandha, vitamin B12, which of course, can be recommended for almost everyone. But like I would say, if you have within the means, go see a nutritionist, do some of these tests, get it personalized to you, because even if there's an investment financially upfront, the productivity, the mental health, like the year's worth of benefit you'll experience from that upfront investment are far in excess of the costs that would go in. And I'm sure I see Giovanni like nodding his head. He would say yes to that as well. So as we bring the conversation to a close, man, is there any parting words that you would like to leave our audience with?
Yes. Sometimes they call depression the black dog, and the black dog rears his head every so often. One thing that I've realized is that it is possible to overcome the fear. And at the same time, the fear can be immensely debilitating. And you may find yourself feeling alone and like the whole world is this dark cloud. And then you will also find that there's going to be that one moment where at least one ray of sunshine beams through. And remember what that happiness feels like, because depression makes you forget that moment and that feeling. And when you feel that warmth, that's when you can take action. And that's when you can start to generate that internal momentum and positive feedback loop. It's something that you can get through. I think you're strong enough.
All right, fellas, just a reminder that it is not too late to sign up for the 100 Great Push-Up Challenge. The link is in the show notes. If you are looking for something to sink your teeth into to bring out the best in your physical and mental and emotional well-being, the 100 Great Challenge is a global community of guys who are out here working really hard for the next 50 days on their mind, their body, their spirit. And as soon as you register, you'll be able to join one of the small accountability groups, 20 to 25 men in each of these WhatsApp chats who are already actively engaged in this challenge and will keep you supported and accountable along the way. So head into the show notes, register for the 100 Great Challenge, and we'll see you there.